Hello and welcome to Season 2 of the Defiant Optimist series focused on the theme of resilience. This program brings together some of the boldest and most innovative leaders who are making finance work for the 99%. My name is Sorel Henriques, and I'll be your MC for today. Our episode today brings us to a conversation between IIX's CEO, Prof. Durreen Shahnaz, and Mr. Shayne Elliott, the CEO of ANZ Bank, on how to build resiliency while addressing the very urgent funding gaps standing in the way of achieving the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals. Before the main event, we'll have Natasha Garcha, Senior Director of Innovative Finance, share updates on IIX's leadership in gender lens investing. We'll also hear from Mr. Christoph Rupi, CEO of Market Access, a partner of IIX and supporter of the Defiant Optimist series, on how they are ensuring the sustainability agenda in secondary markets. Before we get started, let me first share a few words on the tech side. If this is your first time joining us, please note that you'll be kept on mute throughout the webinar, but we invite you to share your reactions in the chat as you listen in. Feel free to ask questions at any time during the episode by clicking on the Q&A icon on the right panel of your screen and chime in on our audience polls. Don't forget to vote for your favorite questions by pressing the like button. We'll be sure to get to the questions with the most like towards the end of the webinar. A special welcome to our Defiant Optimist Annual Pass subscribers. Your questions will be moved to the top of the list during the Q&A section of the webinar, so do leave your name visible when you submit your questions. If you run into any tech issues, my colleagues Karinta and Audrey are here ready on standby, so please reach out if needed. Before we dive in, let me briefly introduce the series to those of you joining us for the first time. The Defiant Optimist is a webinar series by IIX that features leaders in finance and sustainable development. This is more than just a conversation between two people. It's a chance to dive deep into the stories of the leaders who have the potential to reshape financial markets and make them work for the 99%. More importantly, it's also a chance for you to find your path in the movement we're creating together. Next slide, please. To date, we've had conversations with various world and financial leaders from the UN Women, UNCDF, UNESCAP, the Inter-American Development Bank, and one of the largest institutional investors in the world, Nuveen. For those who know IIX, Defiant Optimism is baked into our DNA. For us, it means rolling up our sleeves and doing the work to empower women and underserved communities at the last mile. In the same vein, I'm pleased to invite Natasha Garcha to share more about what the gender lens investing landscape looks like on the ground. Natasha is the Senior Director of Innovative Finance, where she works on IIX's gender lens investing initiatives, impact measurement work, and the structuring of the Women's Livelihood Bonds. And with that, I hand it over to you, Natasha.
Great. Thank you very much for the introduction, Sorel. Always a pleasure to be part of the Defiant Optimist series. If we could go to the next slide, I'd love to share with you one of the flagship issuances of the IIX body that really embodies the spirit of Defiant Optimism, which is the Women's Livelihood Bond series. The first time we issued this was in 2017, and it was the first of its kind. It set a precedent for social and sustainability bonds across the world by being the first impact investing security listed on a stock exchange. And more interestingly, it was the first time you had a financial security listed that was using the entire proceeds for gender lens investing. And it was designed by women in Asia, in the Global South, for women in the Global South. And that made it a very a special product and also defying many of the barriers that we continue to face in financial markets today. Fast forward several years later, we are now on our fourth issuance of the bond. We've been very fortunate to have done all four issuances with our fantastic partners, the Australian New Zealand Bank, ANZ, who you'll hear from later today as well. And together, we really think it takes a village to bring a transaction like this to market. We've brought together a number of banking partners, law firms, development finance institutions, donor agencies, and others who've come together to bring a listed security that each year gets bigger while having deeper impact on women across Asia Pacific. Our most recent issuance was the Women's Livelihood Bond for Climate, a sustainability bond that embraced both gender and also recognized that women need to be a part of the climate action solution. This $30 million transaction has been listed on the Singapore Stock Exchange and complies with the International Capital Markets Association social and sustainability bond standards. We have also got two tranches. One is a 90% tranche sold to private sector investors from across the world, which I'll take you through in a moment, and a 10% sub-debt tranche, which is taken up by our own Women's Catalyst Fund, funded by donor agencies. And it's been fantastic to see that a bond like this, the entire series to date, we've had 4 transactions in the market during the global pandemic, where the main narrative has always been that women are disproportionately impacted by the pandemic. But I think it's been very important to show that the spirit of defiant optimism can also build resilience among these women and make them solutions to economic recovery and subsequently solutions to other problems ranging from poverty to climate change. To have a transaction like this up on Bloomberg by women and for women, which has always made its coupon payments on time and met or exceeded all its impact targets, has been an industry-wide recognition, for which we've got multiple awards from the UN General Assembly, the Climate Action Award, the UN Women Leadership Award, and the Japan ESG Award in 2020. If we go to the next slide, I think one of the big reasons we're different from a lot of the other social and sustainability bonds in the market is really the incredible depth of impact and how we hold ourselves accountable to the women who we serve at the last mile. This is a multi-country, multi-sector portfolio of companies that we invest in through the bond, and each of them serves women in a different way. We have clean energy enterprises, financial inclusion, sustainable agriculture, all recognizing that women can be part of the solution to the 2030 global goals and the UN SDGs. And this is because we are seeing that there's a very strong correlation between risk, return, and impact when you use a gender lens to do your investments. And we do see with our most recent issuance, not only are we aligning with about 14 of the UN SDGs, we're also empowering 500,000 underserved women and girls to be part of the solution. If we go to the next slide, and I'll wrap up here, it's been fantastic to see that a security like this has been, as one of our investors call it, the gold standard for social bonds, because we actually verify the impact with beneficiaries on the ground. And because of that high standard of accountability and transparency of impact reporting amongst the midst of green and impact washing that is happening in this space, we've managed to attract a range of investors from across the world. In partnership with ANZ, we've got a number of investors from Australia and New Zealand, but we've also got a lot of investors from Asia, Europe, and the United States. This ranges from large trillion-dollar funds, pension funds, microfinance investment vehicles, high net worth individuals, and family offices, all coming together to embrace the spirit of defiant optimism that the Women's Livelihood Bond has embodied, and really making sure that Wall Street and the backstreets are firmly connected, as is part of the ethos of IX itself, as a proudly women-led and women-owned firm. And with that, let me hand it back to Sorel. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Natasha. Before we get to today's discussion, we have a very short message from Mr. Christoph Rupi, Head of EMEA and APAC, and CEO of Market Access. Market Access is an award-winning open trading platform regarded as the preferred all-to-all trading solution in global credit markets, creating a unique liquidity pool for a broad range of credit market participants. Drawing on its deep data and analytical resources, it provides automated trading solutions, market data products, and pre- and post-trade services. Mr. Rupi has provided a short pre-recorded message today as he's unable to be here in person due to the time difference. Let's watch it now.
Okay, good morning, everyone, and good morning, Durreen and Shayne. I'm talking to you from a very grey, wet London. That's pretty usual for here. And again, thank you for inviting me. It's always a pleasure to be part of a virtual event with you guys. And again, a big thank you to the A team at IIX for inviting Market Access to be a partner and to help bring the Defiant Optimist conversations to viewers yet again. I really like the fact that we're looking at the roadmap to 2030. It's a really important global impact initiative. It doesn't give us much time. In 2022, it's 8 years away, but it's a significant milestone for all of us. People and economies are still feeling the terrible effect of the pandemic. The most vulnerable communities are really affected. That includes millions of women and children throughout the world. And clearly, this pandemic has changed everything. Finance has clearly a much bigger role to play in this. We want to continue and partner with IIX because our shared defiant optimism will be really needed now more than ever before. We are one of the main places where green bonds, sustainable bonds, the WLB bonds can be traded. Without connectivity, bonds become more attractive to international investors and bondholders. And about 2 years ago, in 2020, just before the actual pandemic started, we launched a climate action that we call Trading for Trees. It's a massive commitment from us, of course, but also a commitment from the investors who are using the platform. And we have celebrated every $1 million, which is traded in green and sustainable bonds, by planting 5 trees. And I'm super happy and super proud as well to say that we have actually in 2021 traded over 51 billion in green bonds on market access. It means that we planted over 250,000 trees across the globe. If I'm not mistaken, I think we're touching 7 or 8 very large projects. And what I love about this is just more than just planting trees. It's really having a downstream impact on the livelihood of people and on the future of their kids. We want to congratulate Durreen and the team on growing the WLB series to fight climate change. And I really want to commend her for tireless work on such initiatives that are empowering hundreds of thousands of women across Asia. All of us, nearly 750 of us throughout the globe, we are very happy to play a small role in continuing the discussion with the Defiant Optimist series and to learn what more we can set our sights on achieving today and in the very near future. So thank you, and over to you, Durreen. I know it's going to be a great discussion with Shayne. Thank you.
We thank Market Access for their support of IIX's work and commend their mission to make sustainable finance trading more accessible globally. And now, for our speakers today, we're excited to welcome IIX's CEO and founder and a global leader in sustainable and impact investing, Professor Durreen Shahnaz. Prof. Shahnaz is a pioneer in social impact, leading IIX to create the world's first social stock exchange, the largest crowdfunding platform for impact investing, Impact Partners, and innovative financial structures such as the Women's Livelihood Bond Series. She was recognized in 2021 by Forbes as one of the 50 women over 50 changing the world, and in 2017, she received the Oslo Business for Peace Award, the Nobel Prize for Business. She's joined today by our special guest, Mr. Shayne Elliott, CEO of ANZ Bank, who will be introduced shortly. Without further ado, let me turn it over to you, Professor Shahnaz, to kick off our session.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sorel, and thank you, Natasha, and thank you, Christophe, for those kind words and really sharing very valuable insights. I think it's also essential as we're talking about sustainable development and equity across the globe for us to step back and take a stock of the current social and economic system in place for inclusivity and sustainability. Sustainable business is no longer a choice, it's a necessity, and finance has a large role to play in moving the needle forward. On that note, I can't imagine a better way to introduce our guest speaker for the session, the inspiring Mr. Shayne Elliott, CEO of ANZ Banking Group. Mr. Elliott has been the CEO of ANZ since 2009 and has more than 30 years of experience in international banking, including in the US, UK, Asia Pacific, and the Middle East. Mr. Elliott is known for leading with purpose, and that's something essential in any global leader today. So as a global leader in sustainability, he leads a bank that believes in shaping a world where people and community thrive. Shayne, welcome to the series, and thank you so much for joining us today. So I would like to kick off the things by inviting you to share more about your impressive track record. It really is impressive. As a leader driven by values, running such an enormous bank and working across the globe, how has your career led you to where you are today as the CEO of ANZ and as a leader in sustainable finance?
Well, thank you, and thanks for the opportunity to talk a little bit about ANZ. It's a great opportunity and it's a great subject. Wow, that's a big question. Look, I grew up in reasonably humble circumstances in New Zealand, and I had the great opportunity to go to university at a time when that was extremely affordable. In fact, it was free, and I was a great beneficiary of that. And I was extremely lucky that I went to work for a great company, and it was a bank, and that was largely by accident. And I worked for a company. I worked for Citibank, and Citibank at that time was extremely global and very open and diverse company, and I just learned an enormous amount from that. And they gave me enormous opportunity, the opportunity to work in many parts of the world, including Egypt and Hong Kong and Australia and the UK and the US and all of those things. And that really gave me an exposure to different cultures and different people and different economies and communities at various stages of development. And I guess, like anything, it's like your childhood, sort of your time growing as an executive or as in a company. Those influences and experiences sort of shape the way you think about things. And I worked with people who believed in sort of diversity, if you will. And so I probably didn't even notice that I inherited some of that thinking. It was a bit like osmosis. So it seemed a very natural thing for me. But anyway, and then I found myself at ANZ, and I found again a fabulous bank that has international reach. We're in 32 countries. We have 40,000 people. We have 8 million customers. And we really went back to basics about who are we and what are we for, and what's the purpose of the bank? Why do all those people come to work every day? What's the point of it all? And that was really when we founded our purpose, to shape a world where people and community thrive. And I can talk a little bit about that, but it was really this idea that through our actions, who we bank, how we behave, the things we care about, we are actually shaping the community, whether we like it or not. We are having an impact, particularly in our home markets of Australia and New Zealand. What we do, what we care about, what we say, how we act is making a change. And so we can either do that consciously and be conscious about it, or we can do it unconsciously.
Right.
And we make the decision to be conscious about those decisions and be thoughtful about the impact that we have on various stakeholders.
And I think obviously, it is working very effectively, Shayne. And I think it was very telling when you shared your sort of beginning with Citibank and how that shaped you. And I still remember, maybe, who knows, maybe our paths crossed, but after my first year in university, I was a little no one. I came back home to Manila, where my parents were living, and I worked at Citibank. I was in the foreign exchange trading, and I remember it was, it was a wonderful opportunity. So you're absolutely right. I think that opportunity to be able to be a part of an organization which opens up, and I think that's what you have done with ANZ. And I think, so that's a good segue to kind of understanding sort of, how do you say kind of stay so optimistic, with this enormous challenges that you face as a CEO, when you're running such a bank and the global challenges that we're facing today. Has there been some sort of a defining moment in your career where you had to lead with defiant optimism?
That's a great question. I spent a month in Manila a long time ago as part of a training program with Citi, and actually that was a real eye-opener for me. I was extremely young, and I had a a very interesting time there in Manila. Hey, look, banking, I've never really worked anywhere else other than in the finance sector, so it's hard for me to compare and contrast with others, right? But I'm reminded that in chatting to one of our customers who runs an airline, he said to me, you know, when I joined the airline, I was told you have to understand that airlines are in a perpetual state of crisis. Right? And I said, well, that's kind of funny because so are banks. Banks are in a perpetual state of crisis, and particularly regional or global banks. There's always something happening somewhere in the world that is a crisis, you know, and we label them, we call them the global financial crisis or the Asian financial crisis, or the tech wreck, or the Latin American debt crisis, or the Russian debt crisis, whatever. And now with COVID, right, which is a crisis. And so you learn without realizing that you are in this very, very fast, rapidly changing environment. And what you learn is, you know, you go back to basics. Those that are able to adapt, those that have inherent, are nimble, agile, survive and do well, right? And so being in that sort of, and, you know, being able to have experienced a lot of those crises firsthand, you learn to be sort of agile and adaptable and realize that all of these you have to learn and then sort of move forward. And we know that after a crisis, the world always looks very different. There is no going back. And so these are opportunities to learn, observe, adapt, and change. And so, you know, I don't know that there's one sort of defining moment. There's many, you know, there's many that are happening all the time. But I think at the heart of your question there is this idea, for me anyway, it's really being conscious of the impact that you have. You know, I think as a CEO, it's very easy to sit in nice offices and surround yourself with nice people and talk about very important things, but actually, and not really have a sense of the impact of the decisions you're making. And so the best way to do that is to be grounded. And the best way to be grounded is actually spend time with customers and staff and the broader community. And so we have a very strong engagement program, not just with our own people and our customers, but with civil society. And so, you know, every week or so, we invite people from union groups, from consumer action groups, from environmental action groups, from, you know, people who represent those who have gambling addiction or whatever it might be, to come in and talk to us about the issues they're facing and you know, the impact that people like us have on their lives and how we can be more thoughtful about things. So I think it's just a matter of really trying to stay connected and accept, as I mentioned, we are shaping the world, whether we like it or not. And so being conscious of the impact that you have, to me, is really. Now, how do you stay optimistic? Well, you stay optimistic because you're shaping the world. That's exciting. That surely is an exciting thing. And our people really respond to this sense of purpose. You know, of course, people come to work for all sorts of reasons and money and sense of, you know, pride in what they do, but they want to achieve something. And I would say that 99% of them don't want to achieve, you know, higher earnings per share or a certain ROE or whatever it might. Those are important. What they really want to know is that they're having an impact, that their work matters, it has value, and that value they will describe. The things that they will remember about their career is the people they helped, the customer they supported, the community that they supported. Those are the things they'll remember, not, you know, the quarterly earnings from 1982 or something. That's not really what inspires people. And so our job is to keep reminding people, this is why we're here. This is what's important. This is how we measure success. And I think that's inspiring and something to be very optimistic about.
No, absolutely. And as you're talking, actually, I was sort of, you know, thinking back and getting very excited, you know, about the fact that I did spend time in banking because you know, what you said is very true. I mean, banking is all about just, you know, moving from one crisis to the other or just being aware of it. And almost the bankers sound like superheroes, which maybe, you know, we are, you know, and this is sort of how we are going to kind of save the world. No, I like it. This is really nice. But I think kind of taking on your kind of spirit of being agile and adaptable, I think, and this is where I think the whole sense of resilience now is also so important, right? To be able to be resilient in facing different crises, and especially now where, you know, in a very long time, the entire world is sort of facing all this crisis. So now you being at sort of the helm of ANZ, you know, with its focus on the solution for a sustainable future. And I have to say, it is very thrilling, even from sitting from outside, to kind of see a bank just so committed to it. And you kind of made this commitment, and the bank has made this commitment to funding and facilitating at least $50 billion in sustainability solution by October 2025. That's like 3 years from now. Now, kind of what motivated this commitment, and are sort of the SMEs, the small and medium enterprises, and women that are part of this equation? Because again, just as climate is very much now at the heart of everything, we always say at IIX that you can't be thinking of climate without women. So what's your thought on all this?
Yeah. Okay. Well, I could talk a long time on this, so I'll try and keep it short. But go back to basics, right? Go back to basics. What's our purpose? To shape a world where people and communities thrive. And so you tear that apart and say, part of a thriving community, so different ways of looking at it. What is a community? A community is about connection and inclusion. You can't have a community if you're not included, if it's not inclusive, right? That's what defines a community. So so our job is to enhance inclusivity, allow people as a bank, allow people to have economic participation. That's our job. So, that they are able to get finance irrespective of their backgrounds, their finance, their gender, their sexuality, whatever it might be, that they're able to get finance, they're able to participate in the workforce or in the business community, that they have basic financial knowledge, which allows you to participate in the financial sector. So those things are really, really important. And that's where the whole support around, certain members of the community, whether it's women in business or other areas, it's so important to us. So that's where it comes from. The second part, how can you have a thriving people or community if it's not sustainable? Like from a climate perspective. So you sort of put all that together and say, this is sort of obvious. So it sounds perhaps a bit arrogant, but you don't need to be a rocket scientist to sit down and say, hang on, as a bank, and if we care about sustainable, building and shaping a world where people and communities thrive, we have to care about the climate and the environment. So tick, done, move on. Okay, we've got that. Then how do we do that? Well, we shape things through our decisions, who we bank, how we behave. So we then said, we have this big balance sheet, we have $1 trillion balance sheet. We allocate capital. We allocate capital by lending decisions and etc. And those things shape the future. So if we give money to a coal mine, that shapes it in a certain way. If we give money to, small businesses run by women, and we are shaping it in a certain way. So it's about the sort of intelligent design, if you will, and standing back and saying, not just, we lend to anybody, or we support anybody. We know, no, there's a design behind this. And so that's sort of the thinking. And that's why when we brought it together, bankers love numbers, right? Bankers and bankers love goals because it's sort of, and people like clarity. So there's a power in clarity of goals. And so that's why we started this, hey, why don't we just put a big number on it? We started with 15, but I think it was 15. We started with 15, by the way, and that seemed like a lot at the time,
right?
5 or 6 years ago. But we sort of blew through that number really quickly, so we kept increasing the number. So that's sort of where it came from, and it inspires our people because it shows that we are walking the talk. Well, you said you want to shape a world where people and communities thrive. What are you doing? Well, we're putting $50 billion, it's a lot, to work to enable that sustainable future.
Right. And how do you think your sort of your stakeholders are reacting to this? Obviously, you are able to push this through. Yep. So did you face any resistance, or was it sort of you applauded, or how was the journey with that?
So let's walk through the various ways. So our people, which is pretty important, they absolutely embrace it. In fact,
they're one of the stakeholders. Yeah,
very important stakeholders, right? So, to give you when I was CFO, but I wasn't CEO at the time. I go around, I talk to a lot to our people, and we talk about the business and do town halls and all that sort of stuff. And I just noticed that this would be about 6 or 7 years ago. Suddenly there was this. All the questions, not all, but a lot of the questions were about climate change, our position, what are we doing, et cetera. And it just sort of resonated with me. Wow, I could see, you could feel this shift. So by having that sense of purpose and then being able to show that we're serious about it, so the employees, big tick, hugely engaged around the subject, not an issue, very, very supportive. Our customers, actually 98% of our customers, the same, because they're dealing with these challenges. They have to operate in a changing world, and they're looking for help, advice, support, ideas, money sometimes. So actually that's been engaged fully. I don't think we've only had a very small set of probably the obvious kinds of customers who've resisted, who have a view that says, hey, you're a bank, you shouldn't have views on these things,
That's interesting.
Now we say, well, hang on, how can we not have a view? We have an obligation to have a view because it's actually good business as well. So the way we deal with that is, hang on, again, we could go on this for a long time, Doreen, but basically, really simply, environmental change is a fundamental financial risk.
Right. Absolutely.
Our job, so forget the politics of it or your views on things. As a bank, our job is to identify risk, mitigate it, and price it correctly. That's what we do. And so it's at the heart of what we do. So customers find, look, broader public, pretty good. I would say the only resistance we've had is a relatively small part of the population who have this sort of banks should stick to their knitting. It's not for them to decide these sorts of issues. But I would say it's a very tiny minority, and we've had pretty much overwhelming support. Now, investors, the people who own the place, right?
Right.
They have a slightly different view. So they are all on board for doing the right thing. They all get it. But what they want to know is at what cost.
Right. Are they going to lose any money with it? Yeah.
So they're interested in the trade-off.
What's the trade-off? Exactly. And then it's interesting, isn't it? Because I think, again, that's probably a very much a human nature, which we see as well, which is, trying to have the cake and eat it too. So that sometimes, again, I mean, there is a sort of a give and take a little bit. But with that, I think, it is very interesting because I remember when we started speaking with ANZ, this is now over 5 years ago. Our first introduction was with Tammy, one of your colleagues, and we just hit it off. And before we knew it, she kind of rallied around to get ANZ to be one of our partners, and ANZ has been an incredible partner for the Women's Livelihood Bond. And what you're saying about risk and return and, bringing stakeholders together, those all encapsulate in what we're doing with the WLB. I will sort of turn it around a little bit because you have been an incredible partner for us for 5 years. I will sort of, be a little audacious and say, how has the Women's Livelihood Bond and the work around it sort of influenced NZ work in sustainability? So yes, I acknowledge, I'm kind of putting it out there, but
no, it's a great curious. No, it's a really great question. So 5 years, Faiz, on one hand, it feels like not that long, right? 5 years ago, the world was really different. So 5 years ago, like today, people take impact investing, sustainable finance, not for granted, but it's mainstream, right? It wasn't 5 years ago. This was leading edge, right? This was not cutting it, bleeding edge sort of stuff. And it was one of those, well, it's nice in theory, but, can it actually work? And so I think what it did for us, it was just this great experiment and a great way to learn and do something, again, to walk the talk. And so we you learn through doing, right? And so to actually do these bonds, you learn. And so really, I think it was an important ingredient that has then allowed us to evolve and learn and grow and expand and say, hey, what we've learned there, we're able to do more of that and actually think of new areas to go into. And now sustainable finance, or shall we say impact finance, so not just environmental sustainability, but this, social impact as well, is now a significant sort of business line for the bank. And so I think it was one of the very early, it was dipping our toe in the water to see, can this really work? Can it make sense? And again, for us, I mean, we're a commercial organization. We're not a charity. We have to generate a decent return for our shareholders. And so we needed to make sure that this could all work well and give a balanced outcome for all the stakeholders, the customers, our people, but also obviously our shareholders. And that's what we learned, that actually you can do that. You can have a successful business in this area.
Right. And I think I have to tell you, and that's really good to hear. And I think one of the things that we were so pleased with is how we also learned together, with ANZ in terms of, how to make this bond more and more attractive, to the investors. And I think one of sort of the best part is that we have a whole bunch of women investors actually from your native country, from New Zealand, and it's because of ANZ. So we're very, very happy that it's obviously we like any kind of investors to be supporting this, but when women come in, it just makes it all even more special. Women investing in women.
Yeah, I think, and it's one of the great, in our time in banking, there's been this great sort of democratization of banking, right? I mean, you think about, I'm 58, but probably more my parents' generation, but it's not that long ago that, if you wanted to borrow money from the bank, or you would put your best suit on and you'd go and make an appointment with the bank manager, and you'd have to go and sort of pitch, and the bank had all the power. The bank, and it was very uneven power structure, right? That all sort of changed in the 70s and 80s and et cetera. And today the power shifted the other way. Actually, the consumer has all the power, and the banks, we are out there, we're out pitching ourselves to the customers, but the consumer has all the power of decision making of who they want to bank with, who do they want to support, where do they want to invest. So that's really quite a different shift. Yeah. And of course, at the same time, partly related and in line with that is technology. And I know it's over talked about, but technology has enabled this opening up of the world. And so the idea that, women in New Zealand can invest in impact investing and have an impact in, India or Myanmar or wherever it might be, that's pretty cool. That is like mind blowing, really, when you think about it, to make those connections all work. So it's really pretty powerful, obviously.
Yeah, and I think, it's very interesting when I think back, my childhood in Bangladesh, and this is right after the war. I remember my mom, who was quite emancipated, and she would, her bank account was at ANZ, and I remember those were the big outing for me to tag along with my mom, once a month to when she went and saw her banker. And I think it's very, very interesting, because I think in terms of what a financial institution can do in terms of inclusion, is very, very important. And it really is a part of that whole equation, because it all starts with that empowerment of money. So I think with that in mind, during your leadership, what are the things that you have pushed for inclusion? Because I have definitely seen, which I was very impressed with, the fact that you have a lot of women leaders, and some of them are obviously have been poached by other institutions. And when I saw that, and I read your quote, how you said, yes, that's great. And I said, oh, I have to remember that, because that's actually, that's the essence of it,
Yeah, look, so first of all, you have to be authentic, right? And so you can't just say things without, walking the talk. So you have to be authentic. So we really go back to that sense of purpose. And it would be easy, and cynical, and some do that, to say, well, there's money to be made in sustainability or diversity, so we'll go and do it. But to me, A, you need to be authentic, and B, it needs to be coherent. So, and what I mean by that is, we can't sit there and say, oh, we love sustainable finance, but we get our electricity from a local coal-fired power station, or we don't do recycling at the bank, So it has to be coherent. So what we did right from the beginning in that sense of purpose is really worked hard on making that coherence. Yeah. Now, it was easier at ANZ, and nothing to do with me. I inherited a company. I've become the CEO of a company that has always been socially progressive, right? And it goes way back to, we're almost 200 years old. ANZ was the first bank in the country to employ women. We were the first bank to have a female board director. We were the first bank to employ aliens, people who were not Australian, to allow them to work in the bank. We were the first bank to allow, these sound really bizarre things, but We were the first bank to allow people to call their boss by their first name. Again, these seem like totally what is he talking about? But these were rules. These were things in social norms. And so ANZ's always been forward-leaning on socially progressive issues, right? So it wasn't like we had to drag the organisation along with the diversity and inclusion work. So it was natural, but what we wanted to do, we needed to give it a bit of a push. And so we've still got lots of issues to deal with. We're miles from perfect. But, yes, we made a big push to employ more senior women, and we got amazing talent, not because they're women, because they're talented. And I did get that, people inevitably, two of my team, Michelle and my CFO, and Alexis, my deputy, got offers to go into great jobs. I mean, I'm proud of that. I think that's a great thing. It's a sign of success. I got told it's a sign of weakness. No, that's a sign of success. One of the things I wrote down when I became CEO, I wrote a page of what we want to be famous for. And I said, we want to be famous as a talent factory where people go, oh, you've got ANZ on your CV. You must be good.
Right.
And, your time, my time, that was, going back, that was Citibank, actually. That was companies in its day like GE or Procter & Gamble or, we went, wow, and so I said, that's what we want. And we want to be known for that. And so that's, it's the price you pay for success, I guess.
Right. No, listen, I was thrilled when I read that because that's exactly the same situation we have at IAC. So I think, I said, we are right there with you, ANZ. We know what it feels like, to actually train the talent and frankly, to do kind of the whole Johnny Appleseed type of thing, so to be able to seed the rest of the sustainable market. Now,
and those people will learn and go on to do great things, and they hopefully, what happens is, they remain great friends of the bank, and so your sphere of influence, your network effect actually grows. So, guess what? If any of you follow Alexis at AMP, guess what? Alexis has taken, and she's taking a lot of the things we did together here and applying them to AMP.
Right.
That's a good thing. And so that's what I mean about that sort of network effect.
Right. No, I completely agree. Now, in terms of the values of ANZ that you're sort of really pushing on and inspiring many, and you have put a considerable effort in building an ecosystem, obviously around it, in the 34 countries you're operating in, and I was reading some incredible numbers, like 5% of the global flow in sustainable finance market is under you. So given all of this, what's your thought on the current sort of the ESG requirements that the companies are made to go through? Are they adequate? Are they impact measurement? Are they actually, what they should be? Or, what's your thought around all of that?
Yeah. It's interesting. It's been a bit of a journey for me. So as I said, I was CFO. I used to run one of the businesses here, then I was CFO, right? And so as CFO, you get to go on a lot of investor roadshows. You meet all these shareholders and these big funds and people who that. I have to be honest, 7, 8 years ago, I couldn't have told you what ESG stood for. I didn't know what
Right.
And actually 7 or 8 years ago when I used to go and see investors, we didn't get asked questions about ESG. We got asked questions about the P&L and about customers and all those other things. Then something changed. And I can't remember exactly when, but suddenly I noticed that at the very end of the meeting, and normally what would happen, investors come and there's a team of people and there's some senior people and some junior people. At the end of the meeting, they usually throw to some of the junior people sitting in the back and say, would you like to ask a question? And guess what? They all started asking questions about ESG, and they started asking questions about climate change and sustainability and those things, diversity, right? And then over that period, not only was it wasn't the last question, it started moving up the agenda. Right. And now I would say half, not all, half our investor meetings start with ESG questions. But it's been this massive shift, right? The other thing I would tell you that's changed is I remember when we set up a ESG committee on the board, which we never had before. So we set that up when under my previous chairman, we set this up deliberately to own our purpose and to make sure we were living to it. I remember at the time talking to my chairman and say, the ESG at that point, it's all about the G, actually. What investors in the market, they were interested in the governance. That's how do you think about it? How do you make decisions? How do you allocate capital? How do you measure outcome? That was governance, was what really was of interest. That, I think, is still quite immature. Like, I think companies like us, we do our best to disclose, to measure, to benchmark, etc. But it's reasonably still immature when you would compare it to, say, financial reporting. So I think that's still got a long way to go. And particularly as a global firm, it can be quite messy because every country is implementing different regulatory frameworks around reporting this, that, and the other, and so it can all be a bit messy. And as you know, there hasn't always been a sort of a standardized or an accepted way of, or a taxonomy about, you know, what do we mean by certain things. Now, the UN Sustainability Development Goals helped in a funny way because they gave at least a framework to say, hey, here's a framework, and we were able to go, hey, of them, which are the ones that are relevant for us? Because they're not all relevant for us. Yeah. So anyway, I think it's still immature. I think my view is, and being, I am an optimist, I actually think companies like us and most of our customers, our big customers, are actually positively engaged in it. So they're not resisting it, not against doing it. They're just struggling. We're all struggling with how we do it. How do we get it to be meaningful and not just data for the sake of data?
So in terms of meaningful, what do you think in terms of sort of the appetite of your clients and, you know, broader stakeholders in terms of actually verifying, you know, the data? So really getting that voice from the last mile, which we spend a lot of time, you know, at IIX doing, because, and it's interesting because we feel very strongly about it, and I know that our investors like it, but sometimes we also get a little bit of resistance because, you know, sometimes transparency, too much transparency is not appreciated either. So I'm just curious, you know, what's your thought on it?
I think the struggle, it's an interesting question. I think the struggle here a little bit is, certainly, again, I can only speak as a bank. It's much easier to measure the inputs. Like, you know, we already did today. We've got a goal to, you know, invest $50 billion in sustainable finance. Well, that's nice, but it doesn't tell me what was the impact of it. Like, did it make a difference?
Yeah.
Was it, you know, was it meaningful? Was it material? Did it change anybody's life? That's the sort of last mile, if you will, that haven't quite, you know, I guess it's to use that analogy of the sort of scope 1, 2, and 3 thing. It's that last piece of the actual impact. So the way we're thinking about it, and we're doing a little bit because it's hard, is to really put effort into those things. So, for example, we have a big passion about financial well-being, right? Our job is to improve the financial well-being of our customers. Yeah, so it's a bit like going to the gym. They're fitter, so they're financially fitter, healthier, etc. If your financial well-being, and we know, and we can measure it, right? So we can actually measure a customer's financial well-being and then see how it progresses over time. That's a much more important metric than how much money I spent on it or how much money I lent in a certain area. So we're trying to apply that same logic to all of our sort of social impacting and say, yeah, but what's the real impact? Yeah, of so the 50 billion that we put, what did it actually achieve? And that's hard.
Yeah, and I think it's good that it's sort of at least, you know, sounds like you're pushing the envelope in terms of sort of trying to connect the dots on how you're doing it now and where it should be. So I guess in terms of sort of moving forward, you know, as we look ahead, obviously a big thing is, you know, the various forms of, I would say, revolution that we're also experiencing in, you know, globally. And one of the biggest one, obviously, is the tech revolution. And I think, you know, if you're going to be sort of optimistic, you know, about the future, you know, what role do you think technology will play or is playing, you know, in the whole financial institution side? And do you think, I mean, it will be the great equalizer, especially given what we have now with, you know, the pandemic as a part of the equation as well?
Yes, I mean, yes, I do. I mean, it's not without its risks. It's not without its challenges. It won't be perfect. But yes, I mean, that is the sort of the reality of human history, is that technology has generally provided greater equality and sort of democratization of services. That's true. It's made, you think about what the mobile phone has done for people in terms of accessibility, So I think it is generally a truism that technology does create greater accessibility and availability of services to people, and that includes banking. Now, the challenge for banks is, do we participate in that, or are we run over by it? Or are we a victim of it? And so our whole point is to say, how do we get in front of that and not be a victim, but actually embrace it and move forward? But yes, I think those things are absolutely true. And we talk about technology today as if it's new, and I know you didn't mean it in that sense, but technology just means a tool. I mean, we've always had technology. It's just today we're talking about. You want to talk about certain types of technology, like this thing. Look at what we're doing now. This is pretty remarkable. I mean, it's magic.
Right.
This is magic, to think that we can do this and have this call.
I know, isn't it?
It's amazing, right? And we should. The problem is that humans take all these things for granted really fast, and then they start complaining about there's a lag or the sound quality is not perfect. So we have very low tolerance for things, but nonetheless, yes, there's undoubted opportunity, and you will see enormous opening up for many in the community as a result of technology. But on the other hand, we have to be mindful that the transition can hurt some. There are parts of the community that are vulnerable to that change and less able to adapt. Without older people, not always, but sometimes older people with certain other sort of vulnerabilities that may not be able to participate in that shift. And our job is to say, how do we do it? It's the same thing with the environment, this sort of just transition. How do we have a just transition to that digital banking future? And it's hard. We don't always get it right. It's really difficult because we can't sustain the old ways of doing things, branches and all that, and all the new stuff. We need to sort of move. And along the way, we need to be careful that, we certainly limit any damage that happens along there, and we sort of bring and support people along.
Right, because again, I mean, technology also is becoming the great divider, right? And especially we're seeing that during the pandemic in terms of access to education. There are millions of children who have now, kind of fallen off the whole education system because they don't have the technology. So I'm just curious, again, as a bank, as a powerful sort of an instrument, which is financing this technology boom across the globe. I mean, how are you ensuring that there is inclusion and sustainability through these technological advancement?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's a hard question. I don't have a simple answer. It's true that what you say, but on the other hand, and again, I don't mean to dismiss what you say because I agree. So my daughter's 16.
Right.
So my daughter was born in Hong Kong, grew up in Egypt, and now lives here in Australia. Right? She's privileged, no doubt. She has more in common. So we live here in Melbourne. She has more in common with probably your children or a child growing up in New York City or in Tokyo or in Hong Kong than she does with somebody growing up in regional Australia.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah,
and due to her life experiences and her ability to connect with people is just different. When I grew up, you connected with the kids in the neighborhood because you were, it was the physical, the people who lived, the kids who lived next door. We would jump over the fence and play with them.
Mm-hmm.
And so technology is changing the connections. So you're right, it is creating some divisions, but it's also creating other connections that replace it. And so I think we just need to be mindful of both. Look, our job is to make sure, again, where we see those divisions, the exclusions, we need to be mindful of that. So for, things like closing a branch. When we close a branch in a town, yes, that may, some of those people will not have the alternative that we would all like them to have necessarily. Yeah. It is a terrible burden and responsibility to make that call. It's horrible, you know, because we have to sit there and say at some point it's unsustainable to have the branch open. But we know there'll be some, hopefully small numbers, who will be negatively impacted. And we have to figure out what can we do. So what do? We try to, and we invest in helping them learn the new technology, giving them the tool to say, you can actually do this. You can connect it, and let me show you how. So we have, in our lingo, we have coaches. So we have the coaches in our branch network who coach people. How can you move into the online world? How can you do your banking using the ATM or on the phone or on your, on your computer? Yeah.
Right. So I'm sure some of those coaches are probably teenagers because they know more than we do, right? So,
yes.
Just one last question, and then we'll go into the fun part, the last fun part, which everyone waits for. But, and I have to ask this. I know, again, you're a great partner on our livelihood bond, but what is ANZ's sort of, you do all these SDG bonds, what are your goals in kind of addressing SDG 5, which is the gender equality, and what role can ANZ play in sort of developing a dedicated asset class for gender lens investing?
Yeah, it's a good question. So our goals there are, again, to be coherent. We have to do it to ourselves first. So, sadly, we're only at 34% of our leaders women today. Now that's right across the company. Now that that is growing at the fastest rate it ever has. So it's going up as faster than we ever had, but it's 34%. It's nowhere near half. So we've got all sorts of programs in place. What we do is lead by example. From our board appointments, I make sure. So we have a whole bunch of companies that part of the bank. I just put it in place and said we will have 50% of all those directorships filled by women. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And guess what? They all said it was, when we started, it was like 22% or something. And we got there. So we use targets, we use incentives, we have a whole bunch of support programs to build talent through the organisations. We've got to get it ourselves right. 2, we need to walk the talk. And so we need to support programs, financing customers who are aligned with our way of thinking and make sure we skew our investments, our dollars, into areas that are aligned with our view of the future. And sustainable investing, and with the right partners, and we have to partner, we can't do it on our own, is a critical part of that. So I think there's a sort of a portfolio of things we need to do. It's probably, if I'm being honest, and I can be honest in the last seconds, it's probably one of the most frustrating things that we do. I mean, I think gender is an interesting, I can tell you in management team meetings, we talk about it a lot. People are passionate, men and women. People are passionate about it. There's a level of frustration that we're not achieving. No, I'm not just talking about ANZ, but the community is not achieving enough. And so people feel like, oh, but I'm doing all the programs. I do we do the gender balanced hiring. We made sure our pay gap has disappeared. We're doing all the things we're supposed to do, and yet the impact has seemed slow. And so part of our job is to, and that can make people a little bit despondent, like almost wanting not to give up, but feeling like, wow, it's just so hard. So,
but also I think and I think, Shayne, sorry to interrupt, but I think one of the things I would say also is it's the kind of the yardstick that you're using, right? So perhaps it may feel like, oh my God, we are not able to hire quick enough more women. But perhaps even that the marginal sort of impact of each woman that you're hiring is much bigger, right?
I agree with that.
Right, so in terms of the family, in terms of the community, and that's what we see with our work as well. And I think it's across the board. It's not just, the women who are in the corporate roles, but really it's also women in the last mile and how the entire value chain, can play a role. But hey, as you said about the partners, we're here. So we are happy to be continuing to work with you, on the Women's Livelihood Bond and ending that. So now the fun part, Shayne, this is the part I love, which is really sort of finding a little bit more about you before we can open up to the Q&A. So this is, we covered some really tough topics. So really to end on a high note. So very, very quick. We have 60 seconds to kind of answer all this. So we're going to start off.
Okay.
So what's your favorite book?
Brideshead Revisited.
Oh, really? Okay. Okay, good. When you're not working, how do you like to spend your time?
Reading.
Reading. Okay. What's your hidden talent?
I'm not a bad home handyman. My father was a carpet builder, so I secretly not bad doing a bit of home handyman stuff.
Okay, and what have you made anything?
No, I just like fixing things up and pottering around, but nothing.
Okay. What's the best advice you've ever received?
Oh, in work, the best advice I received was one of my bosses just said, hey, first of all, banking's not that hard. Just hire the smartest people you can, and they'll figure it out. And that's true.
I think that goes for everything. Yes, that's a good one. What does success mean to you?
Success is about having, well, this sounds hokey, but it is about having that sense of purpose and feeling that your impact was positive, that you can turn around and say what I did made a difference to somebody's life, whether that's a customer or an employee or whoever. Yeah.
Right. No, I think that is very much the case, and especially now, right? And I think that kind of ends with the question that we sort of started our discussion with. What's your reason to be optimistic in 2022? What do we have?
My reason. Oh, well, the reason was my daughter, actually. I just look at my daughter and she's 16, and I just have enormous optimism when I think about young people today. I think they've got a really difficult set of challenges ahead. But wow, I'm just inspired by they're so smart.
They are, aren't they?
Thoughtful about the world that I never was when I was 16. And I think part of it is, the exposure that comes from technology and all these other things. And I think that's something to be really positive about.
Right. No, absolutely. And I think, if we don't mess up the world too much, I think, they will take this place, to a new level. But this was absolutely fantastic. I love the fact that you're, a fellow Evelyn Waugh fan, and this was really, really incredible. So thank you so much. I really enjoyed the chat, and I hope you did too. And let's kind of open up for Q&A. So thank you, Shayne. Really appreciate it. And I'm going to now hand it over to Sorel. Sorel, do we have questions? Do we have a few minutes for that?
Hi, Durreen. Thank you so much for that amazing discussion, Mr. Elliott. We've really loved every minute of it. Amazing thoughts from you on, how we're going to get closer to counting down to 2030. I'm just going to quickly ask a few questions. For the audience, it's not too late to ask questions. Just upvote your favorite questions by liking them if you have a similar question. And I'm going to jump right in. We have a question about ANZ's credit policy, and did you have to adapt it in order to enable to allocate the 50 billion to various SDG sectors, and also give you access to a larger customer base?
Not really. I mean, I think, our risk appetite and policies are sort of foundational. Business is either good business or it isn't. Customers are either good customers or they're not. And so, no, we didn't really change our core. I'm sure there were some things that changed at the edge, but no, not really. I mean,
That's wonderful.
I don't mean to be dismissive. Lending's not that hard.
No, I guess that,
yeah. Anybody can lend money. It's getting it back that's the hard bit, right? And getting it back relies on, the character of the people you give the money to. Yeah. The business they have, is it sustainable? Does it make sense? Is it resilient? And so those things don't really change. And that's, so as I said, our policies didn't really need to change very much.
Great, thank you. One more question quickly. How realistically do you think that we can reach the net zero emissions by 2050? And what's the number one thing we can do in private finance to help reach that goal?
I believe it's possible. I think it's hard. I'm not, and again, I'm not an expert, so you have to forgive me. I think it's absolutely possible. It's all about focus and putting your mind to it, and then getting that sort of alignment of the community. And I think, I can only talk about the bank's role. What we need to do is we need to put our money where our mouth is. We need to stop financing things that take us off that path, and we need to put more money into things that get there. It's not that difficult. I mean, it's a little bit like, I remember advice I got years ago about diversity. I was sharing this challenge, really frustrating challenge. And my advisor, she said to me, it's actually really easy, Shayne. You just have to hire more women. And I went, oh, so when you reduce things to their basics, life's pretty simple. And the same thing about climate change. You want to get to net zero, as a bank, stop putting money into things that create emissions and put money into things that reduce or replace them at lower emissions. Okay.
I like that. I think if you put it that simply, Shayne, I think we need to make sure everyone follows it. Great.
We have lots of thanks for all your comments today, and just one more question that's been upvoted quite a lot. How did your time in Asia and the Middle East influence how you view inclusivity, and particularly gender inclusivity?
Great question. It's a great question. A lot. I probably didn't notice it at the time, right? So I remember I'm in Egypt. I'm 34 years old. I'm the country head for Citibank in Egypt. And I'd only ever been there on holiday. And I'm sitting around the table, and I'm looking at my leadership team, and it was nearly all women. And here we are in this Muslim country, economically disadvantaged, etc. And in my time there, I learned that actually, irrespective of culture and other things, it doesn't have to be the way we think it is at home in terms of women being the minority on the executive teams, etc. So I found that actually, again, in Egypt, amazingly strong women. I married one of them. But anyway, not one of my team, but an Egyptian woman, not somebody on my team. I don't want anybody to misunderstand that. But really strong women in this culture. And then, of course, the same thing in Asia. When I was in Hong Kong, I ran a regional business. I used to travel all the time to, the Philippines and Taiwan and Singapore and all those, Thailand and whatever. Same thing, right? So yes, it absolutely influenced me. It made me realize how normal that can be, if that makes sense, right? And that actually we were abnormal and unusual here in Australia or New Zealand or in the UK or the US not to have lots of strong female leaders in our businesses.
Right. No, Shayne, I'm really glad someone asked that, because that definitely was at the back of my mind. And I think this is something, again, you're absolutely right. I think somehow, we sort of assume that in these countries that women would be in the back, but it's not the case. And I think I'm really glad that you had such an experience.
Just one more thing on that. It's interesting. The other observation I would say there is that was actually one of the great contributions multinationals can make as a company, as an employer, because you set different standards.
Yes,
so going back to that story, what the reason why we had all these amazing women at Citibank in Egypt or around the world was multinationals were seen as inclusive places to work. And so multinationals are seen as meritocracies. And so we had this ability, and it's the same for ANZ today. If we go around ANZ in our Asian network today, we've got thousands of people there, you will see a very, very high proportion of very, very strong female leaders, including country heads and business leaders and all that, right? But disproportionate, better than the average of those countries. And why? Because, strong women or strong people see, hopefully, companies like ANZ as good employers, meritocracies, places that can, that have a sense of purpose and are fair and equitable. And so those things are also really important. And then you have the impact of you raising the standards in those countries. You actually have an impact. And we've certainly seen that in some of the areas where we operate.
And setting a great example. So, no, thank you so much, Shayne. Sorrel?
That's a wrap, Durreen. Thank you so much to both of you, Mr. Elliott, especially for your amazing insights, and to everyone in our audience. Thanks for tuning in, and we hope you walk away feeling more inspired to act with defiant optimism. Please do fill out the post-event survey. There'll be a link in the chat so we know what we can bring you next time. And if you would like to learn more and scale your impact, please feel free to browse our catalog of courses at the IIX Institute website. These will definitely empower you on topics like impact and sustainable finance. Thank you again, Mr. Elliott, Mr. Rupi, Prof. Shahnaz, all of you for being with us today. Just before we go, as we close out, we'd like to leave you with a video preview of our exciting new platform, Impact Partners 3.0. This platform digitally connects global impact capital and builds the ecosystem for impact investing by connecting investors to enterprises that deliver on SDG goals. So you can click on the link on the chat to learn more, and we hope to see you at the next session. Thank you.
As a pioneer in the impact investing space with 12 years of experience, IIX has deeply explored the problems faced by impact enterprises and impact investors around the world. IIX's Impact Partners is a dedicated fintech platform that connects accredited investors to impact enterprises while providing capacity building services to enterprises to become investment ready. Impact Partners is the world's largest equity and debt crowdfunding investor portal for impact investing. Launched in 2011 as Asia's first and largest crowdfunding platform, Impact Partners is now expanding beyond APAC to a global scale, with more data-driven capabilities to automate tedious processes such as deal sourcing, screening, and communication. Impact Partners is an all-in-one platform where you can consolidate your pipeline development process, beginning from deal sourcing to due diligence screening to execution and impact measurement. On Impact Partners, enterprises can access an expansive directory of more than 1,200 accredited investors around the world. Through data-driven matchmaking, you can eliminate the tedious process of reaching out to a large pool of investors and instead directly message the few who are looking for enterprises just like you. To date, Impact Partners has facilitated over 78 deals to support over 171 enterprises, with more than $110 million raised across sectors such as clean energy, education, healthcare, agriculture, water and sanitation, and financial inclusion. This has impacted over 25 million lives, 57% of which are women. Wondering what it takes to be a part of this? In 3 simple steps, Impact Partners directly connects accredited investors to impact enterprises, enables a smooth investment and capital raise process, and provides exclusive access to a global impact network, capacity building opportunities, and pitch fests, and many more. Register now to get early bird offers. If you have any questions, refer to our FAQ or contact us at ipsupport@iixglobal.com. Join us in connecting the backstreets to the Wall Streets of the world.
Thank you, everyone. See you next time.